Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you again for joining us for another IDA Q&A session. My name is Camelia Shofani, and I'm the Senior Manager of Public Programs and Events here at IDA. For our visually impaired attendees, I have dark curly hair, light skin, brown eyes, and a white button-up shirt. I want to thank you for joining us for a conversation around the documentary Katrina Babies, moderated by filmmaker and programmer Zandashe Brown, with director Edward Buckles and producer Audrey Rosenberg. For more information on our screening series lineup and Q&As, please visit documentary.org/screening-series. Before we get started, I would like to offer a brief land acknowledgement. We recognize the Gabrielino Tongva as the past, present, and future caretakers of the land, water, and cultural resources in the unceded territory of Los Angeles. All right, Zandashe, I'm handing it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you for that intro and land acknowledgement, Camilla. Hi, everyone. My name is Zandashe Brown. I am, as she mentioned, a filmmaker and a film programmer, originally from Rosedale, Louisiana. And I'm a Black woman of medium brown skin with curly locks pulled up into a bun and red lipstick in a sort of tan shirt with overalls. And I'm really excited to be joining director Edward Buckles and producer Audrey Rosenberg in conversation today around their incredible film Katrina Babies. So before we get into the conversation, I'd love to go ahead and pass it over to you both, starting with you, Edward, to just sort of introduce yourself.
Thank you so much, Zandashe. My name is Edward Buckles. I am the director, writer, and producer of Katrina Babies. I am a Black male with with medium brown skin. I have on a black shirt and a short haircut and a mustache. Super happy to be here.
Thank you. Audrey?
Thanks so much. I'm Audrey Rosenberg. I am the producer and a co-writer on Katrina Babies. I am in Brooklyn, New York right now, and I am wearing a black shirt. I have light brown hair. I'm a Jewish woman, and I have white skin that is slightly tan because of the summer.
Thank you both for that. So to get into the conversation, I first want to say or acknowledge how you and I met years ago through New Orleans Film Society's Emerging Voices program. And you, I think, had just started the process of making this film, I want to say around 2016 or so, give or take, maybe before that.
It was a little bit before that. I would say that once I got into the program, I really put the foot to the gas.
Right. And so this was already years after the hurricane had happened. And I wanted to know, what was it that made you want to resurface those memories and start telling the story around that time? Was it a particular event, or was it something that had just been weighing on you that you wanted to get out?
Absolutely. You know, I always say that because I was 13 years old during the storm, I always kind of count growing up in the post-Katrina New Orleans as like my research and like development phase, you know, obviously unintentionally, right? And, you know, I just remember like growing up in this environment where it just felt unsafe and unhealthy for a child to grow up in, but we were still growing up in that place. And it seemed like the adults and, you know, the local government were never acknowledging what was happening with us. So once I got older and, you know, once I got into storytelling and theater and filmmaking, you know, the young people of New Orleans was always at the top of my head of who I wanted to tell stories about. And once I started to attend Dillard University and I took a documentary class, a question was proposed, and it was, if you could make a documentary, what would it be about? And for the longest time, I didn't know, you know, that answer. And it kind of sat on me for like a year. And my cousin Tina, who's in the film, she gave me a call one holiday season while I was in film school. And, you know, she was very emotional because of the fact that we were celebrating, I think it was Thanksgiving or Christmas in New Orleans, but she was still displaced. Like, she was still in Shreveport. And, you know, obviously every year we all get emotional, but for some reason this year it was really weighing heavy on her. And, you know, she asked to speak to everybody in the house. It was like 20 of us. And once it was my turn, you know, she had heard from my mom's Facebook that I was involved in theater and film. And, you know, she was like, boy, one day I'm gonna let you tell a movie about my life. And, you know, we kind of talked about that for a while. And she went into what she had experienced during Hurricane Katrina in like in very vivid and like harsh details. And she told me what had happened to her children, who were once my best friends, you know, pre-Katrina. And once she told me about what happened, you know, to Quentin, Shirley, Kennedy, and Daryl, you know, her children, and, you know, everything that they had seen, something just clicked. And, you know, instantly I was like, wait, what if, you know, the reason that, you know, we've been acting out in New Orleans and, you know, just everywhere that Katrina babies are, what if it had something to do with that story that Tina just told me? You know, I wanted to draw parallels between what happened in 2005 and that current state of New Orleans youth.
Yeah, I would say that you've done that beautifully. And Tina's such a character that resonates so much in the story, just as a, you know, a sort of matriarch. And it makes so much sense that those threads come together. I also want to talk about how much integrity there is in this film, and how it was made to sort of center the voices of Black New Orleans youth in particular, like you said, who were the most affected by the storm. And there's some really thoughtful collaboration around the project and how you all have centered those voices. And so I'd love to just hear about how you came onto the project, Audrey, and how your team came together, and how you all have been able to support one another throughout the making of this film.
Thank you so much for your kind words about the film. We worked really hard to find the balance between, you know, Edward's story, obviously, the story of the Katrina babies, the story of the city. And, you know, it was an interesting journey. I think you asked me how I came on the project. So I met Buck when I was in New Orleans doing Soul City with Kudi and Chike, who are our EPs on the film and also mentor Buck. And he presented me with some footage at one point and was just talking to me about Katrina babies, because it was, I'm sure, very much on his mind, as it always has been. And it was Calvin Baxter footage that I saw, and just tears came down. And I remember thinking, like, I'm doing this, like, I'm going to help you. I'm going to produce this. And in that moment, he also mentioned that having it on HBO was his dream. So it was a really cool thing to think back on. Now we're family. I feel like we were probably family then too. And so to answer you, we really assembled, I think, an incredible team of people, which is part of what being a producer for so many years, you know, affords you. Like, how do you find the people to bolster this kind of storytelling? And one of the things that I would say in my experience is that the most important thing is that it's authentic storytelling. And what I mean by that is that Edward is at the center of the storytelling. And by association, the voices of these young people and the people in the community are the loudest. And so that other people do not interfere in that process, especially who do not come from that city or from that community. And so we spent a lot of time really figuring out how to do that, and how to, you know, we made Buck. I mean, he wasn't sure he wanted his story to be part of it when I first met him. And I think it was probably Chike and I the most who said, you have to, you know, it's part of your healing, and it's a part of, it deepens the authenticity of the storytelling. And he's so charismatic, and also really had, I don't want to say too much, Buck, you can say it, but I think, you know, there's a lot of secondary trauma that happens when you're doing a film like this, and when you haven't even had time to address your own trauma. And one of the things I want to say is he had a lot on his shoulders for a lot of years. Even before he met me, he was doing this for many, many, many years, very bravely. And it was only because of the trust and his energy and who he is that made this film possible, in terms of the people talking to him and opening up to him. And so it was my job, in my opinion, to make sure that, like, we got the best animator that they loved, who they talked to about, you know, African art and what the influence was. And his name's Anthony Sendra, and he's in Spain, which is so cool. I love that there's an international person, you know, him, Ose, our composer, said, like, we were very thoughtful about who was going to contribute to the project. our editor, Luther Clement Lamb, who also wrote it with us, and our supervising editor, Gabe Rhodes, obviously Kudi and Chike, and Chike in particular, who mentors Bach. I mean, they both do, but like, and is also from New Orleans, could bring an authenticity in tandem with Bach that was important. Time Studios, our partner, HBO, like we just kind of had an embarrassment of riches in terms of like the setup, but the truth is that there was so much to do to make sure that this film turned out the way that it did. And, you know, we were painstaking about it, and it was worth it.
Yeah, thank you for that. And it shows, it shows, Edward, your voice is really centered in the project, but there's also this really incredible balance of, you know, all the collaborations that were brought into it as well. I also just, you know, I think there's, to speak to the vulnerability that you were talking about, and how this project kind of required you to center yourself as a protagonist. You know, it's hard to share a story like this and to process things kind of in real time. So I'd love to hear, Buck, about how that was for you, you know, and how you sort of navigated like the fear or discomfort that might have come with it, you know, to dive into your personal life around these events.
Absolutely. And in 2014, when I first got introduced to the Film Society, I did this pitch, what is it called? Pitch Perfect. I think, no.
South Pitch.
Yeah, South Pitch. I did.
That's right.
I did the South Pitch, and you know, I was in college at the time at Dillard, and my film professor made me go, like literally. And you know, I had never really told anybody about Katrina Babies, and you know, my first time mentioning Katrina Babies publicly was at that pitch competition, and I was unprepared. I didn't have any footage. I didn't have a PowerPoint. But one of the first questions that they asked me after the pitch was, will you be a character in it? And I was like, no. I was like, no, like, you know, I'm not going to be in this film. This film is for the community. I'm going to be the filmmaker that allows the people who are traumatized to tell their stories, right? And, you know, I was serious about that. You know, I stuck with that for a great amount of years. You know, it took me 7 years to make this film. I did not insert myself into this project until year 6. And if you watch the film, that's hard to believe, right? It's because, and because of the fact that, you know, I'm so centered in the film and my voice serves as like a thread for the film, but I was very resistant, you know, to telling my story. I think that part of it was, you know, not really understanding vulnerability and like, you know, not really trusting, you know, to like share my story. But then also there was a time where it wasn't even resistance. It was just, I didn't know that I had a story to tell. I didn't know that, you know, I was too traumatized by what happened in Hurricane Katrina. You know, I think that often in our communities, there's this comparing of traumas, right? It's like, you know, well, I wasn't in the water, I evacuated, right? But I totally ignored the fact that you know, I was uprooted and I lost my family just because of the fact that I know other people who were actually stuck in their attics and, you know, who was there during the hurricane. So I canceled mine out. You know, it's a similar story that, you know, I see a lot of about people who grew up in, you know, 2-parent households and 1-parent households. It's like, you know, all of us can grow up in poverty, but because I grew up with 2 parents, my trauma is not, you know, it doesn't equate to somebody who grew up in one. So we do that often, you know, in our community. And like, that was really what was happening with me. You know, I did not believe that I had trauma. I was embarrassed, you know, I was embarrassed to put my story alongside people who had really, you know, been in the storm. So, you know, I really wanted to focus on, you know, the people who are in the film right now. And it wasn't until year 6 when, you know, I was in the edit and when, you know, I was just watching all of this footage down and, you know, and, you know, I had been talking about losing my family, you know, on these calls with my team. And I had been, you know, talking about, you know, how that impacted me. And like, it was my first time ever speaking about it. So, you know, I'm feeling all these things that like I never felt before. And like, as I'm watching the footage, I just broke down and started crying. And, you know, it was like a cry that was like, I couldn't stop it. And like, I didn't understand what it was at first. And then it hit me. I was like, wait, you are traumatized, bro. Like, like you are a part of this story, being uprooted and like having your safety net, having your family taken away from you, even to this day, in 2022, that's not normal at all, And I think that in that moment, that was when I was able to become more one with this project. This project was always mine, but once I realized that I also had a story to tell, I think that was when like the process became even stronger. Now the next step was something that like you just mentioned, trust and vulnerability. I think that Audrey mentioned it very, very well. Having like such a super team is incredible, but for me as an individual and like somebody who experienced Hurricane Katrina, I was like, okay, like can I trust everybody like with my story? Like, can I trust everybody with my community story? And I think my team just they knew when to step aside and also when to step behind. And like that just helped, me to gain trust and like understand vulnerability and like, want to feel comfortable with giving my all to this project, alongside the fact that, my peers, it feels very weird calling the people in my film subjects or characters, right? Because of the fact that these are my friends from like the community, it's my family, it's my peers, they're my students, right? So once I, once I like, I guess like documented their stories and like, just saw how brave they were and like saw how much them telling their stories did, for their healing, it gave me the courage, to also do so. So it was like a collective of things that like made me comfortable with, sharing my story, but it was not always easy at all.
Yeah, those are huge revelations to have while working on a film. And yeah, I just want to say thank you for, being brave enough to take that step. And I think it's liberating and validating for a lot of people to see and be given space to explore their own experiences too, because you did the same.
Thank you.
I also want to talk a little bit about, the aesthetics and there's such a love for the culture and the people of New Orleans demonstrated in this film. And for years, I've seen you post these beautiful vignettes of people on the streets, the second lines in their homes, and you're just capturing all this love and joy and smiling faces. And aesthetically, they always feel like a memory, like an old photograph on your grandmother's wall, like a dream. And so I'm curious about the role that grief and memory play in this film, because Katrina left so much to grieve, not only in the people that, were lost, but also this way of life that you talk about that was lost, that the New Orleans of today is not the same New Orleans that it was before the storm. And to be heard it told from young people who are grieving their childhood in this city is especially heartbreaking, but it's important because I don't think the world has heard it before at this scale. And so, you spoke to the sort of care that you held for yourself, but I also want to hear, about the care that was put into the making and the presentation of this film, as that hasn't always been the case or hasn't always been the story of Katrina coverage. So I'd love to hear you both just speak to how you went into this film with care for the speakers and what you knew you didn't want to show in remembering the devastation of the storm.
Yeah, that's a really great question. Like before I had a team, one of the first scenes that I wrote like for this film was before Katrina. Like that was something that I always knew that I wanted to be in this film. Life before Katrina. At one point that was the opening scene, right? It was going back to, I guess, the nostalgia of New Orleans and like our neighborhoods. So it's safe to say that we always knew that we wanted New Orleans to be a character in this film, and we worked very hard to make New Orleans a character in this film. And one of the first questions that someone asks you in New Orleans upon meeting you is like who your people is, like where you from, like what hood you from, and it's because of the fact that you can tell a lot about a person in New Orleans based on where they're from. You can tell a lot about a person if they're from uptown, if they're from the east, if they're from downtown, if they're from the West Bank. Like it's those neighborhoods are like a part of our DNA. It's a part of our identity. right? And we cherish that, you know. I think that there are good ways and bad ways that we take pride in our neighborhoods and like our territories, right? So, you know, you can't make a film about New Orleans, you know, without talking about that, without, you know, having New Orleans as a character. Something that was interesting was the fact that when I started to work on this film, it was at the start of a identity crisis that was happening in New Orleans with our neighborhoods, and, you know, with our people. I did not want to stay away from that. You know, I think that if we're going to talk about Hurricane Katrina, and if we're going to talk about, like, you know, all of its impact and its trauma, we can't steer away from the fact that we are being separated from our neighborhoods. You know, we were not just displaced on August 29th, you know, we are still being displaced within New Orleans. And a lot of what's happening with the impact of Katrina is because of that. You know, it's because we know we are no longer in our neighborhoods. It's because of the fact that we are no longer in our communities. You know, we are being, you know, I think compacted into like these neighborhoods that's like surrounding New Orleans. And that's causing like a lot of territorial conflict. That's causing, you know, like a lot of, you know, identity issues. You know, when I taught high school, one of the most, you know, mind-blowing things to me was that like a lot of my students didn't even know where they were from, you know, and like that's very uncommon, you know, in New Orleans. Like a lot of them didn't understand where they were from. A lot of them were not staying in the communities that they were born in, you know, before Hurricane Katrina. And, you know, I just wanted to make sure that you know, we could tell that story. And that's a very hard story to tell, you know, because of the fact that I'm so close to it. It's a very emotional story to tell, you know. You know, I think that it's my story, you know. My cousins never returned, you know, my cousins never returned to their old neighborhood. So it's like, you know, that did a lot to my identity in my upbringing, you know, as it did to Sierra, as it did to Kelvin, as it did to, you know, Maisha and all of my peers in the film. And, you know, it was like a lot of weight, you know, to carry in the film. But also what was important to me was not just that I say that we were being separated from our families, but it was also like the fact that I wanted to say that there needed to be accountability for how that was impacting what was happening in New Orleans, like the violence in New Orleans, you know. And, you know, many people like challenged me on that and like questioned it. And, you know, they would say, where's the data? You know, and I'm like, you know, us being separated from our families, us being put out of our community, and like, you know, our lived experience is the data. So that was honestly one of the hardest pieces of this process, was to, you know, represent New Orleans in the way that, you know, I experienced, like, you know, growing up in it, but then also draw those parallels between what was happening when it came to violence and crime and, you know, the PTSD and like the anger that the kids were experiencing, and like tie that directly to the fact that we were being uprooted from our neighborhoods. You know, I hope that, like, you know, answers your question. Does it? Like,
yeah. I wanted to add on just from like a broader perspective, which I think I'm in a position to do, which is like, as for, you know, you mentioned Buck's beautiful footage and like the second line footage and all of that, which is some of the first stuff that I experienced also. And I think a lot of our team members did. And it really was, in a sense, a basis for the film, because it's both the community that we're talking about. There's a very human way, an authentic way that he captures the people and the images that you don't often see. And then it also captures the celebratory nature, the joy, the deep roots, ancient roots in New Orleans of culture and of ritual. And so if you look at that, I mean, I think what the film was trying to do was avoid certain things that are going on in filmmaking. And one of those is like overdoing Black pain, you know, like porn about Black pain. We're not interested. And I know Buck and I had a lot of conversations about that. We also had huge conversations about how to capture resilience in the film, because these people are so incredibly resilient, and you don't want to take that away as something that needs to be honored. However, most of the conversations we had were about, in America, the double-edged sword of resilience, which is especially in Black communities, that they've been leaned on for so long because of their incredible resilience without getting what they needed. And to hear these young people say, nobody ever asked me we're not really talking about their parents and their families and their communities because nobody ever asked them either. And so there was a passing on of a resilience that Buck and I were talking about a lot, of trying to break open now and say, okay, yes, there's a reason to celebrate this resilience and this joy, and everybody should experience it, which I hope people do in the film. And then as you were speaking to the incredible grief and loss, how do you begin to unravel that when it's generational trauma, when it's secondary trauma? So we believe you can. We think telling your own story is one way to do it. I think Katrina also is an example of it just is a reflection of America, and we have to face this. And, you know, with climate issues coming as they are, climate justice is an issue. This was so clearly, New Orleans is a Black city, and everybody in our film is from that community, and they were not serviced. And as Buck was saying, and I won't repeat it, but all of the displacement, all of the violence, all of the reverberation of that going on now matters. We're connected, we're a collective. And if we don't handle this, it's, first of all, it's inhumane. That's the first thing. And second of all, you lose these gorgeous human beings who have so much value and deserve to be seen and live with dignity and life, which they already do. And so I think for me also, just like the students and the generations of young people, and then hearing what's going on now, we were just down there for the premiere and talking to people in the community. It's an urgent situation. It's an urgent situation that this be addressed. The violence is out of control. Nobody's happy about it. Who wants to live like that? And nor should they have to. And, you know, Buck was really adamant, I think, in the best kind of way about all of these things, and kept us on track in terms of what felt exploitive, what didn't. And we have this wonderful archival producer, Kate Farragatto, who we worked really close with, and kind of like, you know, it matters what you show from the news. The news hasn't been so wonderful with regard to many, many things in representing Black communities in the news, and what they're doing, and why, and how it's commentated. And so we were very, very careful, I think, in a good way, to keep the film as much as authentic as possible, and to avoid some of those tropes, the issues that I was saying before. But you can't go to New Orleans and not feel the joy. You can't go to New Orleans and not feel the culture and feel the resilience in a good way. And so there was no way to make this film without that. And his footage, I think, is a testament to it.
Can I add to that real quick? We got
Sure.
time? Like,
Of course.
you know, it's yes, like that was perfectly put. And, you know, my footage, you know, represents what I was tired of people, like it's a representation of me being proactive, of being tired of like people misrepresenting us, right? You know, every Hurricane Katrina's film that like I've ever seen, they're showing us dead in the street. They're showing us, you know, at our lowest moments, at, you know, they're showing like the negative impact that Hurricane Katrina had on us. And, you know, part of the reason that like I started to, you know, even document my people was because of the fact that we lost so much documentation in Hurricane Katrina. And, you know, I just think that, you know, our people are so beautiful, and like I just wanted to like make like the everyday people look like stars, because they are. So I came to this film with my footage, right? You know, like I came to this film with it, like with the thought of, this is how I want to represent, you know, young New Orleans. This is how I want to represent, you know, the neighborhoods that like mean so much to me. And like, I didn't just want to depend on archival footage from outsiders and like news footage who, you know, whose job it was to, you know, just like shoot stuff that was going to get like the most clicks. You know what I'm saying? And so, you know, to me, it was my responsibility to like make sure that I can represent, you know, us like, you know, in the right way. But also it was because of the fact that, you know, I'm using second line footage, and like I'm using like all of this cultural footage for a reason. You know, our culture and like, you know, tourism and, you know, everything that's happening in New Orleans is also something that's kind of working against us, right? So, you know, I want you to see that footage, and as much as you love us second lining in the street, and like, you know, as much as you want to say, look at how resilient and strong they are, you know, I put children being rescued, like, you know, our opening scene is children being rescued from Hurricane Katrina. The very next scene is contemporary New Orleans, like us dancing in the street and like, you know, us just looking so beautiful. And I just want you to know that you can't think about one without the other, right? You can't see young children during Hurricane Katrina being rescued and say, oh my God, that's so horrible. That's who they are, like, you know, and whatever, without acknowledging the fact that we are still here today. But you also can't see our second line footage and like our joy and not acknowledge what happened in 2005. So, you know, I think that there's just a conversation that needs to be had in the middle about those two things and like how both of them are important when it comes to this idea of resilience, right? It's like, you know, there's a conversation that needs to be had, and like that's really like what I want, you know, their footage to do.
Yeah, you're able to handle those multiple truths and kind of hold them all in the same space, and it makes for such an emotional experience, you know, for the viewer, of course, but also for people who have just lived through it, and like these are all the things to understand about New Orleans. And there's something really beautiful said in the film around resilience, which you both have spoken to, and that it's different when that resilience is placed upon you versus when you know, have the opportunity to choose that title for yourself. And so, you know, I want to thank you both for just being direct in your language and in your audience and acknowledging, you know, the impact, like the truthful, honest impact that the storm has had on the city and the people today. I would love to hear, I was there with you at the New Orleans premiere, and it was a really special moment, but I'd love to hear about, you know, how people are resonating with it and what the experience has been like for this to, after 7 years, finally be out in the world, what it's been like for you to talk to people of New Orleans, to your students, to folks featured in the film. Just how does that feel?
It's you know, it's surreal. It's a you know, it's a dream, you know, honestly. And like I literally mean that. It's a dream, you know. For the past 7 years, I've had dreams and nightmares, you know, when it came to, you know, Katrina babies. And, you know, when I first started this project, you know, in my early 20s, one of the biggest concerns of mine was, how do I tell a authentic story that New Orleans is going to resonate with, because of the fact that we are such a hard audience. We are hard when it comes to people telling our stories, as we should be. Our stories have been told wrong for so many years, you know, since like before my time, you know, and, you know, people always get our accents wrong. People always, you know, get our narratives wrong. And people always want to, you know, focus in on like our trauma without focusing in, you know, on our joy. And like, it's just always like a disaster. I don't want to say always, but you know what I'm saying? But, you know, I think that, you know, now to sit here with the film that people are calling like one of the first authentic stories to be told about New Orleans, like people are actually saying that, you know, on Twitter and like on social media, you know, natives and like locals are like literally saying that, you know, when they watch this film, they see themselves, they feel like, you know, they are heard, and they feel like someone is speaking for them. And, you know, it's called like a, you know, like a pathway to healing. Like that's a dream, you know. I think that that's more validating, you know. Like it's interesting because even on Final Cut, I remember, you know, everybody being super excited, and like, you know, Audrey can like, you know, stamp this, but it's like, I remember being like, everybody was so excited, you know, like about like the fact that we had finally finished this film. You know, it was a long journey, and, you know, and like I remember I told Audrey, I was like, we ain't finished. We not finished until New Orleans season. You know what I'm saying? Like we not finished, and like we are not finished until New Orleans says what they have to say about it, you know, on Twitter. You know what I'm saying? And you know, I'll never forget during Tribeca, you know, Tribeca created like a streaming link for people to watch it. And like, that was the first time that, you know, everybody like in the world got a chance to stream it, you know, and obviously I was focused on New Orleans streaming it. And like, I remember on that first day, people were just like showing so much love and like, you know, showing so much emotions. And like, that was the beginning of me feeling like I did this right. Now, obviously, you know, in the process, I felt good about the film, you know, during final cut, I was like, okay, this is my voice, this is our story. But to have my community and, you know, my peers stamp this and validate it, you know, it's been like one of the most like rewarding pieces to this process, and like something that, I can't thank God and my team and, you know, my like community for enough. I think that to tell a story about, you know, my people in the right way, and to have them, you know, just partner with me on celebrating it, it's been like a great experience that like I'm still trying to find like the proper words for.
He did say that's me.
Yeah.
And we were really ready for final cut. So I was like, oh my God. But it made sense when he said it. And just to say like 700 people or more got to see the film at the Orpheum Theater in New Orleans. There's nothing, it's indescribable. The laughter at times, the silence at times, just the impact I think the film is making. Overall, I want to say I was very hard on the press before, but like I think Buck and I are really heartened by the response, and that people are really understanding the intention behind this film, right? There's always a double-edged sword to everything. The media is important, press is important, and they're loving us, and they're seeing what our intention was. And so that is the most satisfying thing as a producer and as a filmmaker, when you're like, we worked so hard on so many things, and people are getting it. And I think like, to see what's possible now in terms of impact in New Orleans, and that's always been a focus of Buck's and mine as well, which we're working hard on now that the film is released. How can we use the film to actually create change and to continue in a healing way, and bring healing to New Orleans in some way, in an even bigger way. And then I would say what's also amazing is audiences in general, and people who are not from New Orleans, and how many people were like, oh my God, like I didn't even know that. Like it was like a blip on my screen, and really like it, and just so many things. Like one of the things that I keep hearing is the human element. Like this is about human beings, and like we've always known that. That's always been the root of this film, is human beings, and human beings matter. And like to get to experience, you know, the film through Edward's eyes and through the eyes of the community, I think really wakes people up who are not from New Orleans. That's what I'm noticing, like in a new way, which we were hoping for. And I think that it calls people to action, and that's the idea. I mean, to have discussions, to figure out what's going on in this country. How do we let these things happen? Where are we? What are we doing? And the other thing I'll say that I love about some of the feedback is that some people will say, you know, you weren't so overt about some of the political things and about some of the racism and social things but do you know what? It's undeniable. And I think one of the things Buck and I talked about all the time was how undeniable some of these things are once you hear people talk, and once you build the story of a people and a community and a city. It's undeniable. Like it's really like you can't argue with it, in my opinion. I'm sure there's somebody in our country who would, but I think that something that Buck and I feel like one of the things that Buck accomplished with the film is that undeniability also, and it's in such an organic way that I think people appreciate experiencing human beings, experiencing the city and the story, as opposed to being you know, maybe hit over the head with politics or with a lot of the conversations that obviously still need to be had. But from a filmmaking perspective, I think the organic nature of the human story of it, you know, really creates an undeniable conversation about those other things like racism and an allocation of resources and all the things that need to be talked about.
Yeah, like this film and you know how it's been received like really did something for me that like I think that is important to kind of experience, you know, as a, you know, like as a Black person, you know, as a Black filmmaker, like as a you know, like just as a human, like is that, you know, now like I am like inspired like by the fact that, you know, I believe that like a narrative can be changed. You know, I believe that like a narrative can be controlled, you know, like in this new age of like, you know, everybody like, you know, telling their stories, it's always been thrown around and like, you know, kind of like in this buzzword way of like owning your narrative and like, you know, like controlling your story. And I think that like, you know, for a while, it's like, you know, like I've been like, you know, like in those rooms and like, you know, on those projects, and I didn't really feel like I was owning my narrative. I just felt like, okay, like, you know, it's it's checking a box of this organization. It's checking a box of this job. It's checking a box, you know, of whatever. And like, I think that now that, you know, I've literally, you know, told my own story, and, you know, I've told my, you know, like community story, and like, it seems like the press is finally getting it right. I feel like I'm being so hard on the press, but, you know, it feels like the press is like really understanding like the intention behind this film, you know. It really inspires me and like makes me feel like, okay, we did our jobs, because like a narrative, it really seems that like a narrative can be owned, it can be changed. And like, that's really big for the story of Hurricane Katrina, because it's been misrepresented and mistold so many times.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You know, the sort of contention around the press, just given the relationship that the press had to the city during the storm. And so I'm glad that, you know, it's being represented in the ways that you want. And Audrey, you spoke a little bit too about the impact that you want this film to have. I'd love to hear you speak more to, you know, what you want this film to do for the city and for the world, and what your sort of goals for it are.
Yeah, I mean, films are so hard to make, and they take a long time, and they take a lot of resources, both, you know, emotionally and physically and everything else. And but I think we actually, you got into the film not year 6, year 5.
Year 5.
So we worked on this a long time, and he worked on it an even longer time. And so what I want to say, to give the film its due, is that the film is a form of impact. So Buck and I have been so intense about this that we had a phone call recently where we said, we have to calm down, and we have to remember that the film is going to do things as well, from people watching it, from all of the things Buck's already said. However, we're definitely not going to stop there. So I want to say, I think we've been looking a lot at mental health and healing, and how those resources are not available a lot of the time to the community that Edward is representing and that he's from. And so we're looking at you know, what we don't want to do is something that goes away too quickly, or something that goes and comes and goes, like a lot like people have been through before. So we're working a lot on, you know, what's going to make the biggest impact. And what we've been thinking a lot about is trauma and mental health and healing of trauma, and what are really productive ways to do that, and what are tools that can be given to a community that doesn't have access to it, because a lot of that is very elitist stuff. Like, you know, sometimes it takes a lot of money, and you have to have time. When you have lots of jobs, you can't always go to therapy. You know what I'm saying? So we're trying to look very authentically at who is this population, what do they need? Buck knows very, very well, in my opinion, what the young people need, because he was a teacher, because he's still very connected to the community. So once again, in my role, I want to say, maybe equally, but maybe more important, that the impact come from Black people and from the community itself. I'm happy to support, I plan on supporting, I'm going to support, but similarly to the film, this is sacred space. There's been a lot of mistrust, there's been a lot of damage done. And if you are someone who thinks you're going to walk in there and be a white savior, you think you're going to, you know, do any of those things that have been done historically for years, we're not interested. So I think part of what we're doing, similarly to what we did with the film, is creating that sacred space, that authentic space, and saying, okay, what off of Katrina babies, what is going to be the most impactful thing? And that includes fundraising, which we're getting into, and finding the right resources and partners. And we're very vigilant about who the partners are, because they have to be people that the community trusts and who are really doing excellent work. And Buck and Sierra especially have been essential to that conversation.
Yeah, definitely. And just to add on, you know, I think that it's important that, you know, that we speak about the urgency of it. You know, I think that's something that, like I said, you know, to everybody when they first came onto this project, is that, you know, this is not just like a film that's entertainment. You know, it's all of this is impact. You know, there's something that's happening currently when it comes to New Orleans youth, and like when it comes to like Black New Orleans period, like there's a lot that like needs to be attended to, and you know, if we are going to step in and tell these stories, we have a responsibility to also assist with the healing, and like, you know, assist with the resources when it comes to, you know, filling that void of like what needs to be done when it comes to mental health and trauma in New Orleans. Like, you know, I think that a big part of the reason that, you know, I don't like when I say no one ever access, I'm not talking about our parents, and, I'm not talking about, us. It's because of the fact that no matter what it is, Hurricane Katrina, violence, whatever, we don't understand, and like we don't have the information that we need to heal ourselves. Like I never knew that simply talking about something could bring healing. So I would like to bring that information. I would like to bring, those resources to my community. A few weeks ago we had a screening and we did a guided meditation after, and that's a small piece of it, but I saw how impactful that was to my community. Like, people were crying and people were like breathing, and like, people felt great after that. And like the fact that that's their first time ever being exposed to anything like that is, insane to me. So, I just want to bring, urgent resources to my community, because like, there are things like that are happening right now. Yes, like the flood waters of Hurricane Katrina are long gone, but like its impact is still there, like right now. So, we are approaching that very, 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 carefully, because again, we don't trust everybody who come, in our neighborhoods with resources and, with, impact plans, because like we kind of learned the hard way during Hurricane Katrina. But, I'm glad that, I'm taking lead on that, and, we have amazing partners, and my dream is to bring all of those resources and like put it into the right hands of the people who are already doing the work. We have people in New Orleans who are already doing the work, but they don't always get the resources. They don't always get the dollars. They don't always get the attention that they need to make their goals come true. So, I'm not trying to create something new and like reinvent the wheel. I'm identifying those people who have been doing the works for years, and like in some cases decades, to, heal our people and, be a resource to our people, so that, we can get like the joy and like get the lifestyles that like we deserve in New Orleans. And I'm hoping that this film, on this world stage, and, with our amazing super team and partners, right, we can do everything that we need, to do for my community.
That's really empowering to hear, Edward. And I just also want to say that that meditation that you did in New Orleans following the screening, that was a really special and sacred experience. To have space for communal healing is something really important, especially around an event like this. So thank you for just, how y'all have brought care into that as well. And so just to sort of wrap us up, there are two questions that I want to ask you that maybe we can keep short. And you alluded to, this you've been working on this project here for a long time. And then Edward, you've been working at it, individually for a long time. And I'd like to just ask this question of filmmakers for that reason, because so much time spent on our work is time spent with ourselves as well. So what would you say, if anything, that Katrina Babies has taught you about yourself?
Okay, hold on.
Yeah, that's a big one. Take your time.
It's so many things. I think that one of the biggest, I think that it would circle back to the fact that, this film kind of this film showed me that, like, I was dealing with trauma. This film showed me a lot about myself, just like being like a human, right? And I think that one of the biggest things that like I took away from that is like how much I wasn't paying attention to myself. I think that, for like the longest period of time, we are just like many Black people, especially, in like communities like where I'm from, we're just getting by. We are just like, brushing it off, and we deal with Hurricane Katrina and like we keep it pushing, like, we're strong, we're like resilient. And it just really showed me how much I had suppressed. So now it's like I'm trying to acknowledge everything as much as I can, because I'm like, wow, like I was 28 when I first realized that I was dealing with trauma from Hurricane Katrina, that like I experienced at 13. That's almost 2 decades, right? And wait, is that almost 2 decades? Let me see. I don't want to get the math wrong, but you know what I'm saying? Yeah, no, it is almost two decades. And that just blew my mind. I'm like, that's mad unhealthy to be carrying that much, baggage and like carrying that much trauma. So, this film and making this film and being a part of this film, and, in a way, my life being a subject of this film, it just really showed me that like, I gotta pay more attention to myself. And, I have to, I have to take care of myself and like, be gentle with myself, because of the fact that, no human should have to like suppress that much and like walk around and carry that much around. So I would say like that's been like the biggest thing that it taught me like on a personal level, and like on like I think like on like a craft level real quick, is that it taught me that I don't need the biggest budgets and like cameras to like tell like a story. I just have to lead with story, because like all the time that I spent shooting this film, I didn't really have a budget. So I just led with story, and like I knew that I wanted to tell a real genuine story. And the fact that we've created what we've created has been like just very, very validating and like inspiring, that you don't always need like the biggest, just work with like what you have. I know that wasn't short, I'm sorry.
No, that was really inspiring though. Thank you. And Audrey, how about for you?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, it's reinforced a mission that I have about authentic representation and authentic storytelling. And that, as Buck said before, those aren't catchphrases. And so I feel compelled to go deeper with myself, because I think that's what it requires to really hopefully either help other people do that, and also continue to deepen my ability to make space for other people's stories, as someone who loves storytelling and loves producing and loves being part of the creative process. Also, faith. So I have a lot of faith, and I'm a very spiritual person. And this was a like really intense process, and Buck can tell you. So like, I never gave up on this movie. I never gave up on him. I never gave up on any single element of this film. But I think I might have been able to breathe a little more when I was doing it. I think I might have been able to, I always knew it was going to be okay. So it's not that, but I think I'd like to approach something next time with a little less ferocity, intensity. Sometimes, I can be very tough. And I think that should be it should be accessible to me, but I don't think I need to lead with it. And I think in this case, like, I hope I found some balance, but it was protective in nature of the film and of the creative process. But at the same time, I learned a lot. I think there is a way that faith has to lead the way. I think you have to breathe. I think sometimes you have to, know, you have to sometimes let people make mistakes. You have to let people drop the ball. I don't like that. So I think I do make space for people to learn, but I think I could make more space for my own faith to lead the way, and for my intensity to come down a little bit, even though it helps sometimes. But I would say those are the two.
Thank you both so much for sharing that. That's incredible. I have one more final question to kind of take us out, and it's an even bigger one, but feel free to answer it in any way that you see fit. What is something that you want the world to understand about New Orleans? And there are many things to say, I'm sure, so take your time with it.
Yeah, I think that's pretty easy for me. Like, I mean, it's just something that I think that the film is, kind of preaching, is that, and Zandashe, like, I think the guy, everything you love about New Orleans is because of Black people. What's his name?
Yeah,
huh?
The artist Flem.
Yeah, yes, so the artist Flem, came up with this phrase, and and it's like, everything that you love about New Orleans is because of Black people. And I think that that's what this film is saying as well. I think that's like something that I want people to take away from this film. And like, what it means to me is that when like, everybody loves New Orleans, everybody loves like our food, everybody loves like all of these cultural elements. They love our second lines, they love Mardi Gras, they love festival season, and like, and I think that in the same way that you love that, you have to love its people, and you have to love the Black people of New Orleans. And I just don't think that that's always been, I guess like that has not always been the case, you know, because like had that been the case, what happened in 2005 wouldn't have happened. Like, it's like, you know, that year, like, you know, tourism was booming, you know, people love New Orleans then, people love the culture then, but like, how can you turn on the news and see there are people who create that culture dead in the street, or like, you know, strung out in the street days after Katrina, like, you know, in their attics days after Katrina. So like, that doesn't scream love to me. Like, that just screamed that like, you love what we make, you know, you love what we create. So in the same way that you love our culture, in the same way that like you love our music and our food, it's like, are you taking the time to like, you know, care for the people? And, you know, I think, you know, to this day, I would still say that the answer, and like, not to everybody, but, you know, I think like, just to speak broadly and like, you know, in general, the answer is no, because like, we're still being impacted by Hurricane Katrina. You know, there are children still are not being spoken to, you know, like about how they feel. So I just want people, you know, again, in the same way that like you love like everything about New Orleans, I need, you know, for you to love its people. And, you know, I hope that, you know, this film could, you know, make you realize, you know, how much work needs to be done with its people. So like, when you come to New Orleans for Mardi Gras, and like, you know, like when you come to New Orleans, you know, for a festival season, you know, what are you doing, you know, to like, you know, like just be like of service to the people?
I mean, I have such deep gratitude to everyone in New Orleans for embracing me, and for, you know, I got to see New Orleans through Chike and Buck. And so I got to experience New Orleans a completely different way than most people who go down there for, like Buck said, for Mardi Gras or whatever. So I am forever grateful and blessed to have had that experience and to be part of this film. And really, again, to the people in the film, like, I have deep feelings and bonds and connection with all of them. And I again feel blessed to be embraced by them. And Buck's family, my God, you know, I think you asked, like, what do I want people to love about New Orleans, man? I think I would love for people to land in New Orleans and really understand that they're on sacred ground and they're in a very, very magical place. And that the magic of the place is not what they think it is. And some of the things that they go there for are actually rooted in very dark traditions from the past that we really need to learn about, that we need to understand why some of these injustices continue to this day. So learn your history. It was the largest slave port. There's so many things to learn about the city. If you want to experience the joy, then bring your best self. That's what I would say. Because I think people do not always bring their best self to the city. I think there can be ugliness brought there that is undeserved. And I absolutely agree with Buck. It's a Black city. So just get that through your head. It's a Black city. And I feel like it's a place where if people who are not Black could learn and experience the people, America would change. America would change. Like, it is a place to really understand how wrong America has been about Black people and how they've been treated, because you can't find a place more beautiful, embracing, culturally rich, everything. And it's important to experience it as a privilege. It's important to experience it as a privilege if you're an outsider, not like you're owed it, not like it's Disneyland, not at all. And so I would love for people to reframe their relationship with that city and get some of the magic out of it that I have, that I will forever be grateful to that city. I'm such a New Yorker, and that city is under my skin. I can't wait to go back. Like, I'm like, when are we going back, Buck? So, you know, it pulls you. It's so creative. All the people are creative. Everyone's an artist in a way. I mean, there's so much creativity to mine there, but it has to happen in tandem with support and respect.
Yeah. And it's also like, yeah, like Audrey said, like, I think that, like, you know, New Orleans and Hurricane Katrina and, like, you know, some of the trauma that, like, we've experienced is the perfect place to understand how, like, you know, wrong America, you know, is to Black people. But it's also, like, it's also a place where, like, you know, you can come and, you know, you can realize that we will be all right. Like, you know, like you don't come here and feel sorry for us, you know, like we thriving, we doing our thing, we are rebuilding the New Orleans and like the future that like we want to see. So, you know, you know, it's not a pity party, right? You know, so like both of those two things like exist. And that's one of the things that, like, you know, I wanted to hit in the film, is that we will be all right.
That's beautiful. Edward, Audrey, congratulations. And thank you so much on such an incredible, impactful film that the world is going to be talking about for a long time. It's so needed to remember this event and to understand New Orleans today. And thank you also for just such a rich conversation. Thank you, IDA, for having us here today. And yeah, with that, we will go ahead and conclude our panel. Thank you both.
Thank you so much.